My name is Hilda, and at 60 years old, I learned a lesson most mothers never survive long enough to tell. Just 3 days ago, my husband Henry and I were pushed off a 90-foot cliff by our own son Damien and his wife Melissa. As my body slammed against jagged rocks and the world dissolved into pain, I heard Henry's breath rattle beside me. With what little strength he had left, he whispered words that still echo in my skull. "Hilda, don't move. Play dead." I did, and that decision saved my life. But it also forced me to finally face a truth I had ignored for 25 years, a truth about Damien, about our first son Richard, and about the family I thought I knew. Before everything broke, we were ordinary, comfortably ordinary. Henry and I had been married for 42 years. We lived in a modest house on the edge of town, white siding, creaky porch steps, and a maple tree Henry planted the year Richard was born. I taught children at the local elementary school, and Henry ran a small carpentry shop behind the house. He could turn raw wood into beauty, and I believed he did the same with our family, patiently shaping us into something solid and lasting. We had 2 sons. Richard, our eldest, was warm and open, with Henry's easy smile. He talked about becoming an engineer, about building bridges that would last longer than people. Damien, 5 years younger, was quieter, watchful. His eyes lingered too long on things, on people, as if he were always calculating something the rest of us couldn't see. I loved them both. A mother always does, or at least she convinces herself she does. Every Sunday we gathered around the oak dining table Henry built by hand. Richard laughed. Damien listened. Henry carved the roast and I told stories from school. Life felt safe, predictable. And that was the lie that made everything possible. The change began when Richard turned 20. It was subtle at first, whispered arguments behind closed doors, conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Damien grew sharper, more defensive. Richard grew distant, uneasy. When I asked Henry, he brushed it off. "Brothers fight," he said. "They'll work it out." I wanted to believe him. Then came the night Richard didn't come home. Dinner gone cold, the clock crawled past midnight. Damien stayed in his room, claiming he had a headache. When I knocked, he barely looked at me. His hands were trembling, though he tried to hide it. Henry gathered neighbors, and they searched the woods by flashlight. I stayed home, pacing, praying, bargaining with a God who had never failed me before. At dawn, they found Richard's body at the bottom of the river gorge. The police ruled it an accident, a slip, a fall. I collapsed at the kitchen table, my screams echoing through the house. Damien stood in the doorway, silent. His face was pale, but dry. No tears, no shaking, just stillness. At the funeral, Damien held my hand. I mistook his cold grip for strength. I didn't see it for what it was. Relief. After Richard's death, Damien changed. He became attentive, helpful. He took over work in Henry's shop, learned faster than Henry ever expected. He stayed close to me, asked how I was feeling, cooked dinner when I was too tired to stand. I told myself grief had matured him. In truth, he was perfecting a mask. Years passed. The pain never left, but it dulled, settling into a quiet ache that lived behind my ribs. Damien married Melissa, a woman with gentle manners and calculating eyes. She called me Mom from the first day, and I mistook politeness for love. They had 2 children. Henry and I became grandparents. Life impossibly began to feel full again. That should have been my warning, because families like ours don't recover. They rot quietly from the inside. 6 months ago, Henry and I decided to update our will. We were 60, careful, practical. Between the house, savings, and inherited land, we had just over $200,000. It wasn't wealth, but it was security. It was Damien's idea to see a lawyer. "You should have everything organized," Damien said, smiling, "just in case." Melissa nodded. "We only want to protect you." At the lawyer's office, Damien suggested something that made my stomach tighten, naming him and Melissa as sole heirs, with the understanding they'd distribute everything to the grandchildren later. Henry agreed quickly. I hesitated, but I didn't speak. That night, I lay awake listening to Henry's breathing, a quiet dread pooling in my chest. Something felt wrong, but fear is easier to ignore than truth, and Damien sensed that weakness. After the will, the pressure began. They visited more often, too often. They criticized the house, said it was too big, too old, too expensive. Melissa suggested selling the land. Damien asked about life insurance. "You should downsize," Melissa said one afternoon, her eyes drifting over my furniture like she was already claiming it. When I refused, Damien's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then came the final request: power of attorney. "It's just precaution," Damien said, "if anything happens." That night, I called my sister Harriet. She listened quietly, then asked one question that changed everything. "Hilda, why does he need control so badly?" The next morning, I confronted Damien. For the first time in decades, I didn't soften my voice. And for one split second, just one, I saw it. The same cold, empty look that stared back at me from the river gorge all those years ago. That night, Henry finally broke his silence. "Hilda," he whispered, his hands shaking, "there are things about Richard's death I never told you." My heart began to pound, because some truths don't die, they wait. And as Henry began to speak, I realized something terrifying. The cliff we would soon fall from wasn't the first one in our family.
Henry's hands were shaking so badly that night I had to hold the glass of water to his lips. I remember thinking how old he suddenly looked. Not 60, older. Like a man who had been carrying a weight too heavy for decades, and it was finally crushing his bones. "Hilda," Henry said again, his voice breaking, "what I'm about to tell you will hurt you more than Richard's death ever did." I wanted to stop him. Some part of me already knew that once the truth was spoken, there would be no way back. But I nodded, and Henry began. "Richard didn't fall," Henry whispered. "He was pushed." The room spun. I gripped the arm of the couch, trying to breathe. My ears rang so loudly I almost missed Henry's next words. It was Damien. I shook my head violently. "No, no, you're wrong. Damien loved his brother." Henry let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "He hated him, Hilda. He always did." Henry told me how the jealousy started when the boys were young, how Damien resented the attention Richard received, how every achievement of Richard's felt like an insult to Damien, how Damien learned to hide his anger behind silence. The night Richard died, Henry had followed the boys. They were arguing near the gorge, Henry said. I stayed back. I didn't want to interfere. Henry watched from the trees as Damien shoved Richard, not hard enough to kill him, at least not at first. Richard slipped, clung to the edge, begged, and Damien stepped on his fingers. I screamed. Henry collapsed into tears. Hilda, I froze. I couldn't move. By the time I reached him, Richard was gone. The police came. Questions were asked. Henry lied. He told himself it was protecting his remaining son, that losing both boys would destroy us. I thought I was saving you, he whispered. I was wrong. I didn't speak to Henry for 3 days, but the truth didn't change Damien. It only revealed him. From that night on, I watched Damien differently. Every smile felt rehearsed. Every kind word felt calculated. Melissa wasn't innocent either. The more I paid attention, the more I saw it, how she echoed Damien's opinions, how she watched me when she thought I wasn't looking. I began quietly protecting myself. I canceled the power of attorney papers. I visited the bank alone. I changed small details Damien wouldn't notice, yet. But Damien noticed everything. One evening, he showed up unannounced. You seem distant lately, Mom. Is something wrong? I forced a smile. Just tired. His eyes narrowed. You've been to the bank. It wasn't a question. That was the moment fear truly took hold. The plan came from Damien a week later. A family trip, he said brightly. Just us, a cabin near the mountains, fresh air, healing. Henry wanted to refuse. I saw it in his eyes. But I agreed, because sometimes survival requires pretending you don't see the knife until it's already raised. The drive was quiet. Melissa chatted about nothing. The children played on tablets in the back seat. Damien drove, his hands steady on the wheel, his face calm. Too calm. When we arrived, the cabin was isolated, surrounded by trees, no neighbors, no signal. That night, I barely slept. At dawn, Damien suggested a hike. There's a lookout point, he said. Beautiful view. My stomach twisted. The trail was narrow, steep, dangerous. When we reached the edge, Damien stepped behind Henry. Time slowed. Damien shoved. I screamed as Henry fell, instinctively grabbing my arm and pulling me with him. The world exploded into pain. Rocks tore at my skin. Air vanished from my lungs. Then, nothing. I woke to silence. My body was broken. I couldn't feel my left leg. Blood soaked my clothes. Henry lay beside me, barely breathing. That's when he whispered it again. Hilda, don't move. Play dead. Footsteps approached. Damien stood above us, peering down. Check their pulse, Damien told Melissa. Melissa's voice was cold. No movement. They're gone. They left us there. And as darkness closed in, I understood something terrifying. Damien hadn't just planned our deaths. He had perfected them. Hours later, a hiker found us. Henry died on the way to the hospital. I survived.
And now, lying in a hospital bed, bones shattered but mind clearer than ever, I know one thing. Damien thinks I'm dead, and that mistake will cost him everything.
Woke up in a hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and death. Machines hummed softly beside me, each sound reminding me that I was still breathing, something Damien had never intended. My body felt like shattered glass. Every breath burned. My left leg was wrapped in metal and bandages, suspended so unnaturally that I couldn't even look at it for long. The nurse didn't know my real story. To the world, I was a woman who had miraculously survived a hiking accident. To Damien, I was already dead. And that lie became my greatest weapon. Henry was gone, they told me gently, as if kindness could soften the truth. My husband of 42 years had taken his final breath in the ambulance, his hands still clutching mine. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Grief would come later. Right now, something colder had taken its place. Focus. The police came that afternoon. I told them what Damien and Melissa wanted them to hear. A tragic fall, poor footing, no witnesses. The officers nodded sympathetically, wrote their notes, and left. But before they did, I asked one question. Did my son come looking for me? The officer hesitated. No, he said. No family has contacted us yet. I closed my eyes. Of course not, because Damien believed the job was finished. The doctor told me I would be in recovery for months. My leg might never fully heal. He spoke with pity, with caution. I nodded and thanked him, but inside my mind was already moving faster than my body ever could. That night, I asked for a phone, not my own, a new one. When the nurse left, I dialed the only person I trusted completely, my sister Harriet. She answered on the second ring. "Hilda," she whispered, "they told me you—" "I'm alive, but Damien can never know." There was silence, then a sharp intake of breath. "Tell me everything." And I did. Richard, Henry's confession, the will, the cliff. By the time I finished, Harriet was crying. "He tried to erase you, like Richard." "Yes," I replied quietly, "and now I'm going to make sure he can't erase anyone else." Over the next few days, Harriet became my shadow. She handled everything the hospital couldn't know: false paperwork, private arrangements, quiet transfers. Officially, Hilda was listed as deceased from complications after surgery. A death certificate was sent, flowers were sent, condolences poured in, and Damien stayed silent. Not a call, not a tear, not even a performance of grief. That silence spoke louder than any confession ever could. From Harriet's phone, I watched it all unfold. Damien posted a carefully worded message online, how tragic the accident was, how much he loved his parents, how grateful he was for prayers. The comments flooded in. Such a devoted son. They raised him well. My heart breaks for Damien. I felt sick. Then came the will, exactly as I predicted. Within a week of my death, Damien contacted the lawyer. He moved quickly, too quickly. The house was locked, the land appraised, the accounts transferred. He mourned efficiently. But what Damien didn't know was that I had already made changes. Months earlier, after that call with Harriet, I had quietly amended everything. A second will, a sealed document, a delayed execution clause. If both Henry and I died under suspicious circumstances, all assets were frozen pending investigation, and full ownership would transfer not to Damien, but to Harriet with strict instructions.
Damien was about to discover that death doesn't always mean victory. The call came 3 weeks later. I listened through Harriet's speaker as Damien's voice cracked, not with sadness, but with rage. "This has to be a mistake. I'm the only heir." "I'm sorry," the lawyer replied calmly. "Your parents made additional provisions." "What provisions?" Damien demanded. The line went silent. Then Melissa's voice, sharp and panicked, cut through. "You said everything was handled." Click. The call ended. I smiled for the first time since Henry died. But revenge is never simple, because when people like Damien lose control, they become dangerous. That same night, Harriet's house lights flickered. A car idled longer than it should have. I knew that presence before I saw it. Damien was searching, not for money, for answers, and eventually for me. I couldn't stay hidden forever, so I planned my return, carefully, a controlled resurrection. With Harriet's help, I contacted an investigator, a retired detective named Marcus Hale. I told him everything, showed him hospital records, Henry's hidden notes, the timeline of Richard's death. Marcus didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back and said one sentence that chilled me to the bone. "Your son isn't impulsive, he's methodical, which means Richard wasn't the first attempt, and you weren't meant to be the last." That night, I understood the full scope of what I was dealing with. Damien wasn't just my son, he was a predator, and predators don't stop until they're exposed. 3 days later, the trap was set. A court notice was sent to Damien, an audit was opened, an inquiry into the hiking accident was reopened, and finally a message was delivered. Not from Harriet, not from the police, but from a private number. One simple line: "You missed." I imagined Damien reading it, his breath stopping, his carefully constructed world cracking, because now he knew his mother wasn't dead, and the cliff he pushed me from was only the beginning.
Damien didn't reply to the message. That silence told me more than any words ever could. Men like Damien don't panic loudly. They don't scream or beg. They go quiet. They think, they calculate, and then they strike where it hurts the most. Marcus Hale warned me the same night. "When a predator realizes the prey is alive," Marcus said calmly, "he doesn't run, he hunts smarter." From that moment on, I stopped thinking like a mother. I started thinking like a survivor. The audit sent Damien into chaos, quiet chaos. Harriet monitored everything: bank visits, lawyer calls, sudden changes in routine. Damien pulled Melissa out of public view, kept the children home, stopped posting online. But one thing became clear. He wasn't afraid of prison. He was afraid of exposure, because prison ends eventually. Exposure never does. Marcus reopened Richard's case unofficially. Old police reports, witness statements, photos from the gorge. What was once dismissed as an accident began to show fractures. And the fall, the position of the body, the marks on Richard's hands. Finger bruising, pressure. Someone had stepped on them. 25 years ago, the truth had been ignored. Now it screamed. But we needed more. We needed Damien to make a mistake. That mistake came from Belissa. She was weaker, always had been. Marcus followed her movements carefully: grocery store, school pickup, doctor visits. She checked over her shoulder constantly. Fear was eating her alive. One afternoon, she broke. She met a friend at a cafe and whispered too loudly. "He wasn't supposed to survive," Melissa said, her voice shaking. "Everything is falling apart." Marcus recorded it all. Intent, knowledge, complicity.
Melissa wasn't innocent. She was an accomplice. That night, Damien came to Harriet's house. I wasn't supposed to be there, but I was. We watched through the security camera as he stood on the porch, calm as ever, clean clothes, relaxed posture, the same mask he had worn all his life. When Harriet answered the door, Damien smiled. "I know she's alive," he said quietly. Harriet didn't pretend. "So what if she is?" she asked. Damien's eyes darkened. "Then she needs to stay hidden." The threat hung in the air. Harriet didn't flinch. "You should leave." Damien leaned closer. "Tell her she should have stayed dead." Then he walked away. That was the night I understood something critical. Damien wasn't trying to escape justice. He was trying to finish the job. Marcus accelerated everything. Police were alerted anonymously. Evidence packages were prepared. A formal reopening of Richard's case was requested. But legal systems move slowly. Damien didn't. 2 days later, Harriet's brakes failed. Only luck saved her. The mechanic found the tampering. Deliberate, clean, professional. Damien was escalating, and now he had crossed the final line. I made the decision myself. "I'm done hiding," I told Marcus. He hesitated. "He will come for you." "I know," I said. "That's the point." The plan was dangerous, reckless, but it was the only way to end this permanently. We arranged a meeting, a trap disguised as closure. Marcus leaked information intentionally, a rumor that Hilda's death certificate had been challenged, that a witness had come forward, that a survivor might testify. The bait worked. Damien contacted the lawyer, then the investigator, then me. The call came at midnight. "Hilda, you're alive." "Yes," I replied. Silence. "I just want to talk," he said, mother to son. I laughed. "You lost the right to call me that the moment you killed Richard." His breath changed. "Meet me," Damien said, "alone." I agreed. The location was poetic. The old river gorge, the same place where Richard died, the same place where everything began. Marcus and the police were hidden, watching, recording. Damien arrived alone. He stepped out of the car slowly, hands visible, face calm, the same mask he had worn all his life. "You look strong for a dead woman," he said. "I had good teachers," I replied. "You and Henry." That name cut him. "I didn't mean to kill him," Damien said suddenly. "Richard was weak." I stared at him. "No," I said. "You were jealous." His mask cracked, just for a moment. "He had everything," he hissed, "and you never saw me." There it was, the truth he had buried under decades of lies. Damien stepped closer. "You should have stayed quiet," he said. "Now everyone loses." Before I could speak, Marcus moved. Police lights exploded through the trees. Damien froze. For the first time in his life, he had no control. As they handcuffed him, Damien turned back to me. This time, there was no anger, only fear. "You're my mother," he whispered. "No," I said. "I was." And as they led him away, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. But it was short-lived, because justice isn't always the end. Sometimes it's just the beginning.
The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in feeling. The kind of cold that settles into your bones and reminds you that truth, once exposed, doesn't care who it destroys. I sat in the front row beside Harriet, my hands folded tightly in my lap, my legs still stiff with pain that would likely never leave me. Every step I took into that room felt like walking deeper into a life I never asked for, yet could no longer escape. Across the room sat Damien, my son. He wore a clean gray suit, his hair neatly combed, his face calm, too calm. The same expression he wore at Richard's funeral, the same mask. But this time, it didn't fit as well. There were dark circles under his eyes. His jaw twitched when he thought no one was watching. And beside him sat Melissa. She looked smaller now, fragile. Her hands shook as she clutched a tissue. She avoided my gaze completely. Guilt had finally found its way into her body, even if she refused to let it reach her voice. The judge entered. The room stood. Then silence fell. And with that silence, the story Damien had spent his entire life hiding began to unravel. The prosecution started with Richard. Photos were displayed, crime scene images from 25 years ago, ones I had never been shown, marks on fingers, defensive wounds, the angle of the fall. An expert testified calmly, clinically. Richard did not slip, he said. He was pushed, and when he tried to hold on, additional force was applied to his hands. I closed my eyes. I didn't need to hear more, but I stayed, because mothers like me don't get the luxury of looking away. Then came Henry's confession. His recorded statement, taken just days before his death, played through the courtroom. His voice sounded older than I remembered, heavy with regret. "I stayed silent to protect my son," Henry said, "but I destroyed my family by doing so." I felt Harriet squeeze my hand. Henry had finally told the truth, even if it cost him everything. Then came the recording, Melissa's voice. He wasn't supposed to survive. The words echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Melissa broke down then. She sobbed openly, her shoulders shaking. Her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. Damien didn't move. Not yet. The prosecution turned to the cliff, the hiking trip, the isolation, the lack of signal, the shove, the staged accident. Medical experts testified. Rescue workers spoke. The hiker who found us took the stand, his voice trembling as he described Henry's condition. He kept saying her name, Hilda, over and over. That's when Damien finally looked at me. For the first time in the courtroom, our eyes met. And I saw it. Not regret, not sorrow. Fear. The defense tried to salvage what they could. They painted Damien as a grieving son, a man under pressure, a victim of circumstance. They suggested manipulation, emotional instability, even implied that Henry had been abusive. I laughed, not out loud, but inside, because lies only work when no one knows the truth, and the truth had already won. Melissa took the stand. She hesitated, stuttered, lied, until the prosecutor leaned in and asked one question. "Did you check for a pulse?" Melissa froze. Her silence said everything. She began to cry. "Yes," she whispered. "Damien told me to." Gasps filled the courtroom. Damien's mask shattered. "Shut up," he yelled, jumping to his feet. "You're ruining everything." The judge banged the gavel. Damien was restrained. Exposed. When it was my turn to testify, I stood slowly. The courtroom blurred for a moment, then sharpened. I spoke clearly. I spoke calmly. I spoke as a mother who had buried 2 men and nearly lost herself. "I loved my son," I said,
looking directly at Damien. But love does not excuse murder. Silence does not excuse betrayal. And blood does not excuse evil. Damien stared at me. I don't know what he saw. A mother? A witness? Or a mirror? The verdict came 2 days later. Guilty on all counts. Damien showed no reaction. Melissa collapsed. Sentencing was swift. Life imprisonment. No parole. No appeals. Just finality. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. How does it feel? Do you forgive him? Is this closure? I didn't answer, because closure is a word people use when they don't understand grief. That night, I returned to the house Henry built. The maple tree still stood. The porch still creaked. The silence was heavy, but honest. I sat at the oak table alone, and for the first time in decades, I allowed myself to cry. Not for Damien, but for Richard, for Henry, for the woman I used to be. I didn't sleep that night. The attorney's words echoed endlessly in my head. Other incidents, other names. I sat at Henry's oak table until dawn, staring at the grooves his hands had carved decades ago, realizing that I had only uncovered one layer of Damien's darkness. Justice had been served for Richard and for Henry, but justice, it seemed, was late to the rest of the story. At sunrise, Harriet arrived with coffee and worry written all over her face. She didn't ask questions. She never needed to. She simply sat across from me, waiting. "They called you too, didn't they?" she finally asked. I nodded. Damien wasn't just cruel. He was practiced. That was the word that terrified me most. 2 days later, I met Marcus Hale again, this time in a small, windowless office at the State Building. Files were stacked everywhere, old ones, forgotten ones, the kind no one opens unless someone refuses to let the past stay buried. Marcus spread photographs across the table. 3 young men, different towns, different years, same pattern. "Accidents," said Marcus. "Falls, drownings, 1 overdose." My stomach turned. "And Damien?" I asked. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He slid one final file toward me. Damien's name appeared in every case. Witness, friend, last person seen. Always close, always untouched. I felt something inside me fracture permanently. Because this wasn't rage, this wasn't jealousy, this was design. The investigators believed Damien had been testing boundaries for years, learning how far he could go without consequences. Richard had been the first death that truly mattered, the one he got away with. Everything after that had been refinement. "And Melissa?" I asked quietly. Marcus sighed. "She knew more than she admits, but not everything. That almost hurt more, because evil shared is easier to see than evil hidden behind loyalty. The press didn't know yet. The state wanted silence until they could reopen cases properly. But rumors spread anyway. They always do. Whispers followed me at the grocery store. Strangers stared too long, some with sympathy, others with fear. That's Damien's mother, as if darkness were contagious. Melissa took a plea deal, 25 years. She testified fully. She cried a lot. I didn't attend her sentencing. Some forgiveness must be private or not exist at all. Weeks passed. The house felt emptier than ever. Henry's absence echoed louder now that the noise of trial and justice had faded. Grief returned in quiet waves, sudden, unexpected, cruel. One afternoon, while sorting old boxes in the attic, I found a notebook. Henry's handwriting. My heart clenched. Inside were dates, observations, small notes about Damien, moments Henry had noticed but never acted on, worries he had written down but never shared. On the final page, one sentence stood alone. Silence was my greatest sin. I held that notebook to my chest and cried until my body ached. I visited Damien once. People warned me not to. I went anyway. The prison smelled of metal and despair. When Damien entered the room, something in me finally accepted the truth. This wasn't my son anymore. This was a stranger wearing his face. "You look tired," Damien said, studying me like an experiment. "I buried your brother and your father." A smile flickered, gone in an instant. "You chose them," he said. "No," I said, calmly. "I chose truth." Damien leaned back. "Truth is flexible." I stood. So is justice, but it always snaps back. For the first time, Damien said nothing. Outside, the sky felt wider than it had in years. I realized then that closure wasn't something you wait for, it's something you build. Months later, the state reopened 3 cases. Families finally received answers. One mother hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Because of you," she whispered, "I can sleep again." That was when I understood something profound. Survival isn't selfish. Sometimes it's a responsibility. I sold the house eventually, not because it hurt too much, but because I was ready to leave pain behind without forgetting it. The maple tree was cut down carefully. I kept a piece of it, Henry's last gift to me. I moved closer to Harriet, smaller place, quiet mornings, honest laughter. Life didn't return to what it was. It became something else, something earned. On the anniversary of Richard's death, I visited the gorge alone. I stood at the edge, not in fear, but in defiance. "You were seen, both of you," I whispered. The wind carried my words away, and for the first time in decades, I felt peace, not because everything was healed, but because nothing was hidden anymore. That night, as I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. "You think it ends with him?" My breath caught. Some legacies don't die easily, and some stories aren't finished telling themselves. The message haunted me. "You think it ends with him?" I read it again and again, my fingers trembling, my heart beat loud in the quiet bedroom. For months I had fought to believe that Damien was the end of the nightmare, that prison walls and iron bars had finally sealed the darkness away. But that single sentence cracked the fragile peace I had built. I didn't reply. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I called Detective Marcus Hale. "You need to see this," I said. An hour later, he was sitting across from me at my kitchen table, his expression darkening as he read the message. He asked for my phone, copied the number, and ran it through his system. "Burner," he said. "Disposable. Untraceable. For now." "For now," I echoed. That was becoming the theme of my life. 2 days later, the reopened cases hit the news. Not Damien's name yet, just the stories. Long-buried tragedies resurfacing like bodies refusing to stay underwater. The media called it the gorge pattern. I called it proof that evil leaves fingerprints, no matter how carefully it wipes its hands. That's when the letters started. Real letters. Handwritten. No return address. The first arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under my door. "You were supposed to die quietly." I dropped it like it burned my skin. The second came 3 days later. "Heroes always think they're alone." By the fourth letter, Marcus had stationed an unmarked car outside my building. "You're not paranoid," he assured me. "Someone's playing games." "But why me?" I asked. Marcus didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was heavy. "Because you lived, and because Damien didn't work alone as often as we thought." The investigation widened. Old police reports revealed patterns that made my stomach twist. Damien had surrounded himself with men like himself, opportunists, liars, men who knew how to disappear after leaving damage behind. One name appeared repeatedly: Evan Cross, a former business partner, a childhood friend, a man who had testified on Damien's behalf 20 years ago, claiming Damien was gentle and misunderstood. Evan Cross had vanished shortly after Damien's arrest. That terrified Marcus more than anything else. "Men like Damien don't inspire loyalty," he said. "They inspire imitation." Harriet begged me to leave town. "Come stay with me. Let the police handle this," she insisted. But something inside me refused. I had spent decades in denial. I wasn't going to run now. The fifth letter arrived with a photograph. Me, standing outside my building, taken less than an hour earlier. That night, Marcus moved me into protective custody. A safe house. Plain walls, no mirrors, no windows with bars. I felt like a prisoner again, this time of someone else's unfinished plan. Then the call came. From the prison. Damien had requested to speak to me. Marcus advised against it. Because I needed to see his face when I told him I knew. Damien smiled when he saw me. "Still standing," he said. "Who's Evan Cross?" I asked immediately. His smile didn't fade, but his eyes changed. Just for a second. Long enough. "Why ask me?" he replied calmly. "You're the one who likes digging up graves." "He's sending me messages, threats." Damien leaned forward. Then he scared. "Of what?" "Of you," Damien said softly. "You broke the illusion." My skin crawled. "Did you plan this together?" I demanded. Damien shrugged. "Some people don't need instructions. They just need permission." That was when I understood. Damien wasn't the end. He was the blueprint. 2 weeks later, they found Evan Cross, alive. Barely. He had been hiding in an abandoned cabin near the state line, armed and unstable. When officers entered, he didn't resist. He just laughed. "You should thank me," he told them. "I finished what Damien started." In possession were notebooks, diagrams, names. My name circled repeatedly. Evan Cross confessed everything. He had helped Damien launder money, helped intimidate witnesses, helped clean up after Richard's murder, details that made even seasoned officers sick. The letters, the photographs, the message, all him. "You don't get to survive monsters," he said during interrogation. "You become one or you die." His trial never happened. Evan Cross was found dead in his cell. Suicide, they said. But I didn't believe them. But for the first time, I didn't need to, because the truth was finally complete. When Marcus called to tell me it was over, I felt empty. No triumph, no relief, just exhaustion. "You're safe for real this time," he said. I looked at my hands, older now, scarred in ways no one could see. "I was never weak," I said quietly. "I was just unaware." I returned home a month later. The world hadn't changed. I began speaking publicly, not for fame, but for warning, about denial, about silence, about the lies families tell themselves. The truth feels too sharp. People listened. Some cried. Some walked away angry. But seeds were planted. One evening, as I watered the small garden outside my apartment, a neighbor asked me gently, "Do you regret surviving?" I thought of Henry, of Richard, of the women who hugged me because they finally had answers. "No," I said. "I regret waiting so long to see clearly." That night, I opened Henry's notebook one last time. On the final page, beneath his sentence, I added my own. "Truth doesn't erase pain, but it prevents its inheritance." I closed the book, and for the first time since the cliff, I slept without fear. But peace, I had learned, is not the absence of danger. It is the refusal to look away from it.
I didn't sleep that night. The attorney's words echoed endlessly in my head. Other incidents, other names. I sat at Henry's oak table until dawn, staring at the grooves his hands had carved decades ago, realizing that I had only uncovered one layer of Damien's darkness. Justice had been served for Richard and for Henry, but justice, it seemed, was late to the rest of the story. At sunrise, Harriet arrived with coffee and worry written all over her face. She didn't ask questions. She never needed to. She simply sat across from me, waiting. "They called you too, didn't they?" she finally asked. I nodded. Damien wasn't just cruel. He was practiced. That was the word that terrified me most. 2 days later, I met Marcus Hale again, this time in a small, windowless office at the State Building. Files were stacked everywhere, old ones, forgotten ones, the kind no one opens unless someone refuses to let the past stay buried. Marcus spread photographs across the table. 3 young men, different towns, different years, same pattern. "Accidents," said Marcus. "Falls, drownings, one overdose." My stomach turned. "And Damien?" I asked. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He slid one final file toward me. Damien's name appeared in every case. Witness, friend, last person seen. Always close, always untouched. I felt something inside me fracture permanently. Because this wasn't rage, this wasn't jealousy, this was design. The investigators believed Damien had been testing boundaries for years, learning how far he could go without consequences. Richard had been the first death that truly mattered, the one he got away with. Everything after that had been refinement. "And Melissa?" I asked quietly. Marcus sighed. "She knew more than she admits, but not everything."
That almost hurt more, because evil shared is easier to see than evil hidden behind loyalty. The press didn't know yet. The state wanted silence until they could reopen cases properly. But rumors spread anyway. They always do. Whispers followed me at the grocery store. Strangers stared too long, some with sympathy, others with fear. That's Damien's mother, as if darkness were contagious. Melissa took a plea deal, 25 years. She testified fully. She cried a lot. I didn't attend her sentencing. Some forgiveness must be private or not exist at all. Weeks passed. The house felt emptier than ever. Henry's absence echoed louder now that the noise of trial and justice had faded. Grief returned in quiet waves, sudden, unexpected, cruel. One afternoon, while sorting old boxes in the attic, I found a notebook. Henry's handwriting. My heart clenched. Inside were dates, observations, small notes about Damien, moments Henry had noticed but never acted on, worries he had written down but never shared. On the final page, one sentence stood alone. Silence was my greatest sin. I held that notebook to my chest and cried until my body ached. I visited Damien once. People warned me not to. I went anyway. The prison smelled of metal and despair. When Damien entered the room, something in me finally accepted the truth. This wasn't my son anymore. This was a stranger wearing his face. "You look tired," Damien said, studying me like an experiment. "I buried your brother and your father." A smile flickered, gone in an instant. "You chose them," he said. "No," I said, calmly. "I chose truth." Damien leaned back. "Truth is flexible." I stood. So is justice, but it always snaps back. For the first time, Damien sky then that closure wasn't something you wait for, it's something you build. Months later, the state reopened 3 cases. Families finally received answers. One mother hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Because of you," she whispered, "I can sleep again." That was when I understood something profound. Survival isn't selfish. Sometimes it's a responsibility. I sold the house eventually, not because it hurt too much, but because I was ready to leave pain behind without forgetting it. The maple tree was cut down carefully. I kept a piece of it, Henry's last gift to me. I moved closer to Harriet, smaller place, quiet mornings, honest laughter. Life didn't return to what it was. It became something else, something earned. On the anniversary of Richard's death, I visited the gorge alone. I stood at the edge, not in fear, but in defiance. "You were seen, both of you," I whispered. The wind carried my words away, and for the first time in decades, I felt peace, not because everything was healed, but because nothing was hidden anymore. That night, as I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. "You think it ends with him?" My breath caught. Some legacies don't die easily, and some stories aren't finished telling themselves.